Harvard.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand today and speak about this important issue. I want to thank my colleague who preceded me and is sharing his time with me, the member from Victoria. And I also want to say how proud I am of my colleague, the member from Halifax, who sponsored this motion that reads as follows: that in the opinion of the House, microbeads in consumer products entering the environment could have serious harmful effects, and therefore the government should take immediate measures to add microbeads to the list of toxic substances managed by the federal government under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act 1999. A fairly clear-cut request, Mr. Speaker, something that the government could move on. The evidence is clear about the damage of these chemicals, of these products, and in industry itself is recognizing the fact that these are harmful additions to our oceans, to our lakes, to our environment, and they are doing something about it. Far be it for this government, then, I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, not to recognize that it's time for them to take, in this case, frankly, not a major action, but a significant action in terms of trying to do something about the environment. I must say, though, that when I say that, I'm not overly optimistic. We've heard the government say that they're going to attend an international conference and talk about it and see what will happen. I have sat here in the past nearly 4 years, Mr. Speaker, and seen the government gut the Environmental Protection Act, seen them gut the habitat protection provisions of the Fisheries Act. I've seen them cut hundreds of millions of dollars out of agencies like the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, for science, the Department of Environment. The money that goes into funding the science that will determine the links and the impacts that that we're having on the environment, on the marine habitat, and the consequences of that to all of us. I've seen this, Mr. Speaker, and it continues to cause me concern. The latest is the government made regulatory changes to the Fisheries Act to allow aquaculture, salmon farmers, Mr. Speaker, to be able to use toxic substances in the conduct of their farming, of their sea farming, and we know from past experience there's already been a company on the East Coast that has faced serious charges and been forced to pay significant fines, Mr. Speaker, for having done just that. But now the government has weakened the ability of the government to be able to protect that marine habitat, protect the environment, so that the operators of open pen salmon farms can continue to prosecute their business almost with no regard to the traditional fishery, to fish habitat, Mr. Speaker. And so I must say, while I'm standing and speaking in support of this motion and encouraging the government to follow through and to do something about this in light of the overwhelming evidence, I'm nonetheless somewhat pessimistic about it. Mr. Speaker, you know, when it comes to our lakes, rivers, and oceans, there are a lot of things that need to be done in order to change or reduce the effects on those environments, whether it be lowering water levels, rising temperatures, or acidification. We may, in fact, be only able to mitigate their effects. In the case of microbeads and the impact they have on their environment, we can simply stop the production of microbeads. We can stop it at its source and therefore don't have to deal with the introduction of these substances in our environment. Now, let's be clear. We know that plastic is a very serious concern, contaminant in the world's oceans. Especially problematic are small manufactured pieces of plastic called microbeads, which are used in consumer products such as facial cleaners, facial cleansers, shower gel, and toothpaste. These microbeads persist in the environment and cause harm to fish and other wildlife. Mr. Speaker, there have been outrageous, frankly, concentrations of microbeads found in the Great Lakes water, particularly downstream of major cities and in the sediments of the St. Lawrence River. As has been said by others, microplastics, microbeads can be consumed by a variety of marine life, including fish harvested for human consumption. They can cause asphyxiation or blockage of organs of marine animals. Chemical pollutants tend to accumulate and persist on microplastics, which could transfer these chemicals to animals ingesting the plant. What we need to do, Mr. Speaker, is simply stop them at the source. I had the opportunity to attend a conference a few weeks ago in Victoria, where the topic was ocean acidification. Mr. Speaker, our oceans are becoming more acidic as a result of the increased CO2 in the air. The oceans are just simply not able to handle it the way they would. Now we need to act. We need to recognize the fact that climate change and that CO2 emissions are a problem, and we need to actually do something to control that. But we need to recognize that is having a real impact on our oceans and on our marine environment. But again, I refer to you, and there's some skepticism being expressed at this conference among scientists and researchers about the failure of this government, of this federal government, to recognize the fact that these are problems, that they need to step up the funding of science, of research, and begin to take steps in order to mitigate the impact. Mr. Speaker, what is it that that New Democrats want to do? I indicated that earlier. We want to take immediate action to designate microbead plastics as toxic under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which would then allow the federal government to regulate, to phase out, or eliminate the use of microbeads in products used or produced in Canada. We want a clean and healthy environment. It's something that we have stood here in this House and talked about for many years, but certainly for the last 4 years as we've witnessed the onslaught, the attack on our environment, on our marine environment by this Conservative government. We want to ensure the ongoing recreational fishery and the safety of fish and other aquatic species. And this is something that I fail to understand, the contradictions that exist within the government caucus opposite. They, on the one hand, work to promote the recreational fishery, for example, and try to make sure that the private sector groups, nonprofit groups that are out there working on clearing up the habitat to promote the recreational fishery are supported, and yet dealing with an environmental issue like this, Mr. Speaker, they are hesitant. They fail to follow through. It's those kinds of contradictions that perplex many of us here, and certainly many Canadians in Dartmouth, Cole Harbour, and beyond. It's time we acted. It's time this government moved forward. We know what the problem is. We know what the impact is. We know what the solution is, Mr. Speaker. We need to join with the 21 companies around the world that produce or carry cosmetic and personal care products that have made some level of commitment to phase out microbeads in their products or not carry products containing them. We need to, you know, it seems to be this government will only take leadership from the private sector. Here's an example. It's time that the government got on board and actually began to do something about a serious problem affecting our environment. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question, come on.